Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar on smart charging infrastructures, live from the Netherlands Consulate General in San Francisco. My name is Walter de Wit. I am Innovation Attaché at the consulate here. To the guests from the Netherlands and from the US, thank you very much for joining us here today. To the Dutch delegation, good afternoon. Almost finished. You've had a week of meetings. I hope and sincerely hope that you had a great week with many good, interesting meetings and a lot of follow-up to do. To the four speakers of today, thank you very, very, very much in participating in this session. As we have agreed, you have 10 minutes each for your presentation. When you go into your last minutes, we will give you a sign that the time is almost up. Today, I will not be doing this alone. The moderator of the session will be Edwin Westerburger of Fier Automotive. Edwin, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and tell a little bit more about Fier Automotive, and then we are good to go. To you, Edwin.
Yes, good morning, Walter.
Morning.
It's very early for you. Here it's in the afternoon, so it's good that we see each other. Yes, I'm from Fier Automotive and Mobility. We're a business development company in the Netherlands, and we are involved in many electric mobility projects internationally and in the Netherlands. And we would be in California and also in Portland this week because we were also responsible for the Dutch e-mobility pavilion, which would have been in the EVS in Portland this week. So very nice to be here as a moderator. I really like the topic of charging infrastructure because we are also involved in electric mobility projects, for example, electric trucks, including the right infrastructure, and also electric shared vehicles, including the right infrastructure. So for that reason, the topic is, I think, very interesting. Just to continue for the audience, if you have questions to the four speakers, you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A. Just like Walter said, there will be opportunities to give the speakers a question. We will do it in two blocks. First, two speakers will present after each other, and then we will have the first Q&A session. So, yeah, very interesting. First speaker is Nancy Cabalt, and Nancy is the first female chair of Holland e-mobility, which is the national platform for electric mobility in the Netherlands. And Nancy has a broad experience in electricity grids and topics on charging infrastructure because she was former CEO of the Dutch DSO Stedin and also vice chair of ELAT. Nancy will speak about the national strategy on charging infrastructure in the Netherlands. So, the floor is yours, Nancy. Nancy, you are muted.
Yeah, I see it. Yes, hello. Good morning, America. And good afternoon to the Netherlands. I'm here from the Netherlands. And thank you for your nice introduction, because it's true. I've been involved in electric mobility for over 10 years, which I bet I was there at the start, you could say. It's been an interesting week this week, and I'm proud to be in the end also. I was also at the beginning, and I think you kind of saved the best for last. So I'm really excited to tell you all about how we, about the Dutch approach, let's say this. And it's been an exciting year. And a lot happened over this year. I think after 9 years of preparation, last year was really an explosion. And I will show you how we in the Netherlands cope with this explosion. And I don't know if you see my presentation. So if you do, yes. Next, please. So I'm the chair of Holland e-mobility, and I would like to explain to you what Holland e-mobility is. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it actually started with what they call a Green Deal. And that's an initiative from private and public parties that said something has to change. We need to get started with electric mobility. And it evolved since 2016 to a platform which is an advisory organ to the ministry and which stimulates the outroll of mobility in the Netherlands. Next. And a lot has happened. Last year, in 2019, the National Climate Agreement came along, and it's a huge challenge introducing CO2 in the Netherlands. And we are very happy that mobility is one of them, one of the 5 sectoral agreements which have to do their part in the CO2 reduction. And of course, electric mobility is a big part of the mobility. There's also other parts in the mobility part, let's say public transportation, but electric mobility is a big part of the climate agreement and a big part of the challenge into reducing actually the CO2 in the Netherlands. Next. The Dutch have big ambitions. I put them on one slide for you so you can actually see them. And the ambitions are 100% zero emission new sales customer cars by 2030, but also public transportation, also in city logistics, and also in dedicated transporting by 2025 in the cities. So it's really, really a large challenge, and it really asks a lot of all the parties in how to do that. And we realized that an integrated approach and fast upscaling of charging infrastructure for the Netherlands, which also already has one of the most dense charging networks in the world, is a big challenge because we need to grow faster and faster and faster. And the government's ambition for all new cars to be emission-free by 2030 actually asks for an acceleration. A sharp increase in adoption of electric vehicle poses new challenges for national network, tripling the need for charging points by 2025 and even 8-folding it for 2030. So it's really, really a big challenge. And how do we approach that? Next. If you look at the e-mobility National Climate Agreement, the calculations say that we have about 1.9 million EVs driving in the Netherlands, and that means we need 1.7 million EVSEs. That's big numbers. I will show you what numbers we're at, but it's a sharp increase, and the government's really willing to do a lot about it together with the private parties. It's fiscal instruments, it's financial instruments, it's also communication. There's still a lot of uncertainty or maybe miscommunication about EVs. We need to stick to the facts and help people in maybe what's their hurdle to actually get an electric vehicle and do that by the facts and not by the myths. So there's also a lot of communication effort. And and that's what we're talking about, the National Charging Infrastructure Agenda. And it is a complete approach hand in hand with the energy transition, because you can have ambition on the cars, but if your infrastructure is not ready, I mean, it's chicken and the egg, you need them both. And it doesn't matter who's first, they need to go hand in hand. Next. If you look at the National Charging Infrastructure Agenda and the focus, there's basically 4 major focus points. It's accelerating the rollout process. So if you are a customer, you get your electric car, 7 out of 10 Dutch people actually need to don't have their own parking space. So they depend on public parking, so they depend on public charging infrastructure. And it cannot be that you have your car and have to wait, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you can actually charge it in your streets. So we need to look at the process. But we also need to protect our grids, and upscaling smart charging and vehicle-to-grid solutions can help us do that. Smarter solutions can actually prevent large infrastructure investments. And then the backbone, the OCPP is an open market, open protocol, which allows us to standardize and facilitate everything needed to make electric driving for customers or business customers as easy as possible. And then there's also logistics and transportation challenges. So it's an integral approach in all these 4 main areas. Next. Now, if you look at it, how we do it actually with a regional approach. So there's 6 regions with different focuses. And it's also based on how these areas are, how people are actually living in these areas. We have, let's say, the part where you have Amsterdam and the bigger cities. There we look at the smart charging possibilities. We have a part where tourism is high. How do you cope with that? We have logistics challenges. We have urban and rural areas. So all these approaches are active collaboration with grid operators, but also with municipalities, also with businesses. So it's a really integral approach. And as you can see in the chart, the charging points are growing fast, but with the ambitions of 100% zero emission, it needs to go faster. So it's really a big challenge, and I think we're up for it. But it really needs everybody involved, ready to do it with each other. Because if the cities are not cooperating, it's not happening. If the grid operators are not getting their grids ready, it's not happening. So you need everybody together to actually make that change. Next. So it's strong government leadership. They have strong ambitions. They've made that. A climate agreement is nationally signed off, and we're actually working to get that done. There's fiscal incentives, and there's a lot of attention for charging infrastructure. And the open protocol, I want to mention that. It's really something that's it's what we really think it's important to make electric driving for customers as easy as possible. You need to be able to charge your car at every station. So that's really part of the Dutch approach. If you look at some key figures, next. For EV in the Netherlands, we currently have 2020 EVs driving. And you see this, it's only 2.2% of our fleet today. But we already have the densest charging network worldwide. I mean, we have 9% of the global public charging infrastructure already in place. It's 28% of the European public charging infrastructure. And we almost have small 60,000 public charging stations in place. So we're really, really up to speed already. And we're just looking at accelerating it. But we also have electric taxis and already 9,000 electric buses. So you see, we're really, really, we got it started, and now we need to take it to the next level.
Nancy, 1 more minute.
Yes. As a summary of my presentation, I'd like to show you a video. So maybe you can start the video for me.
To preserve planet Earth, we need to change the energy and mobility system worldwide. The Dutch are accustomed at transforming big challenges into great opportunities. We share knowledge, encourage easy use, support entrepreneurship, and connect sciences. We are committed to zero-emission mobility. Transition starts with ambition. The Dutch ambition is to extend our leading position in the field of zero-emission transport further, to inspire and motivate others in taking the road to zero emission and to accelerate along it. As a result, the Netherlands has one of the densest charging networks in the world, and we're one of the leading players in electric transport. Not only in the rollout of passenger cars and electric buses, but also in charging infrastructure and the new development of new technologies and services. Many foreign-built charging poles have Dutch technology inside. We invented seamless charging services and open protocols and export them worldwide. Something to be proud of, we think. Dutch startups have global influence on new technology development, increasing efficiency and reducing costs. It's through the spirit of the next generation that we find new ways to grow. The key success factors are cooperation, knowledge development and regional anchoring. A number of Dutch cities are working towards zero-emission zones to support the rollout of clean modes of transport. The introduction of renewable, sustainable city distribution will help to make our cities smarter and greener. We strongly believe in working together. That's why, amongst others, the Dutch government works via public-private partnerships. Together, we can find the right solutions that make a sustainable difference. Join us on our journey to a zero-emission future.
I think that sums up the minute, right? I want to say that maybe last words is that in order to keep moving forward, we also need the international cooperation. So I would like to stress the importance of that in order to export Dutch products, but also to learn because we also have a lot to learn still. So I really support the international cooperation that we are doing right here. And I want to thank you and looking forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Very interesting story, I think. I knew it already, of course, because I'm Dutch.
Hope so.
But for the audience, and especially the people in the delegation, please send us your questions, because I think after the second speaker, we will come back to you. If there are any questions, you can be answering them. But the second speaker, I think, is also very interesting. It's Phil Jones. I can call him Phil, he explained me. He is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Transportation Electrification in the US. And I think Phil is also a long time already within electric mobility. And he will present today about the US financing opportunities regarding charging infrastructure projects and things. So, Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Edwin, and good morning. Thanks to Nancy and everybody at the CEC and the consulate in San Francisco who helped put this event together. Just as a side note, I was in Amsterdam in October, got out of the airport at Schiphol, got in the taxi line, and I was very pleased to ride in an electric taxi to my hotel. And I am lobbying the city of Seattle now, the SeaTac airport, to do similar things. Right now, they have a lot of mild hybrids is the requirement, but we have to move to a situation like Schiphol, I think. So next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking both about the federal situation and the state situation here in the United States. First, a quick word on the Alliance for Transportation Electrification. We're a trade association. We're pretty new in the space in the United States. We got started about 2.5 years ago. We are cross-sectoral, so we have utilities, OEMs, EV charging companies, and others. We started with about 20 members. We've grown rapidly. Our job is to focus primarily on the state level, not on the federal level. And we encourage the regulators, or the state commissions, they're called public utility commissions, to become more forward-leaning and proactive. Next slide, please. This is our current list of members. I just put it up there for you. Just a couple of things. EVBox is in there. We have a few Dutch companies. And the last one is really important. We do take, as Nancy said, international cooperation seriously, and the Open Charge Alliance, OCA, has been really important for our success in the United States. Next slide, please. So our broad goals is alignment. This is a very difficult and challenging space. I call it the collision of three big sectors: automotive and transportation. On the one hand, the electric grid, utilities, and then of course we have the IT sector, the people who write software for network management systems. So this is a very difficult challenge to bring together in either a regulated space or an unregulated space. So really what we're focused on right now is the infrastructure gap. Nancy talked about it for the Netherlands, but you're much further ahead than we are. There are wide disparities in our 50 states and the District of Columbia about how far we're we've gotten an infrastructure, but suffice it to say that even California, and Mark's going to talk about California in a minute for the CEC, but California is behind. New York is terribly behind. Florida behind. So we have Texas is behind. So we have our big states really haven't awakened to the challenge yet and started to work in a collaborative way to build out the infrastructure and to work on adoption. That last bullet is important. We're probably one of the few groups in the states that are talking about interoperability and open protocols. We support OCPP. It's not the be all and end all. There's additional functionality that certain charging providers like, but we think it's a great base to build on. Next slide, please. You asked me to speak a little bit about the federal situation. I usually don't like to do this, but I'm going to do it. Not much is happening there, but I'm trying to be neutral here and objective, and I'll try to give you an overview. So the Trump administration, there's a lot on these slides, and feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have questions. Mr. Trump himself continues to oppose EV incentives and grants. He supports the traditional fuel industries, fossil in particular, both coal and natural gas. The issue of the manufacturing base has become a key issue for this administration. Some supply chain issues in the electric grid, and some of our key infrastructure. He announced something on an infrastructure package, but we don't know the details. He started with an infrastructure package, nothing happened. There was some news this week about another infrastructure package, but because it's an election year, most of us think that nothing will get done. Mr. Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. He is a strong supporter of the Paris Climate Accord, working with countries like yours, the Netherlands and others in the EU and China, Japan, Korea. In his campaign material, he talks about a net zero carbon energy system by 2050. Now, this is different from the Green New Deal advocated by certain members of Congress that want net zero by 2030 or 2035. Mr. Biden goes out to 2050. He was the only Democratic candidate who actually put charging stations in his campaign material. He put out the number 500,000 new charging stations by 2030. He also supports advanced biofuels program, and the number he has for a federal infrastructure package is 1.7 trillion. We have two houses of Congress. As you know, we have the Senate and the House. So in the Senate last year, Senator Carper from Delaware worked, frankly, on a bipartisan basis, which was good, and came up with a big transportation infrastructure bill. It easily passed the committee, but it's not going anywhere right now. It provides about $1 billion in funding for ZEV, zero emission vehicle infrastructure. In the House, Chairman Peter DeFazio, from where I live in the Pacific Northwest, he's from Oregon. He just marked up a bill this week, just on Wednesday. It's a big bill, $500 billion over 5 years. There's a lot in there on various transportation modes, including road and rail. But it does provide $1.7 billion for EV and fuel cell infrastructure, mainly for corridor charging. We also have a very successful program I'll talk about in the next slide. It's called the Low-No program for buses. It's a competitive grant program. He increases funding and makes it ZEV electric only. Right now it's fuel cell, natural gas, and electric, but he makes it. So that is past the committee, but I don't think it's going anywhere as well. So next slide, please. So among the agencies, the US DOT, the Federal Transit Administration, I just referred to the NOLO program, or the Low-No program. This is a very successful program. It's really oversubscribed. Many transit agencies around the country have received grants. They're converting their buses from diesel to electric. US Department of Energy is where a lot of the grants are. I just list 4 bullets here. There are others. But so despite the Trump administration policy, the department has continued to do good work. And I just list a few of them here. The Vehicle Technology Office is working with the OEMs As I said, the manufacturing base is really important to this administration, so they're working on advanced technology vehicle manufacturing. And just in January, the Energy Grand Challenge was announced by Secretary Brulette. So many of our companies and utilities have applied for competitive grants to a new program that includes batteries, grid integration, and other issues. Next slide. Actually, let's go 2 slides ahead because I'm running out of time. This is just a graph that I use in my speeches when commissioners and others say, Phil, the revolution is not happening. And I put this slide up. Obviously, there are a lot of projections, and BNEF, Bloomberg, came out with its report last month. Some of you have seen that, but we're talking about really rapid growth in the light duty vehicle market. Next slide, please. So let's go over a few states. As I say, I advocate in the states, so we'll end with California, Mark, and then Mark will take it there for the CEC. But I start with Michigan. So Michigan, DTE Energy has a program in place. It has reached out to vendors. Many vendors are taking part. It has several use case pilots. It includes a demand charge holiday. And frankly, DTE Energy out of Detroit is proposing a new fleet program. It's going to file with the commission next month. CMS Energy is the other large utility in Michigan. We worked very closely with them and the commission to get a program in place. This is a pilot program. Its CEO is the co-chair of the EEI effort on EVs, and her name is Patty Poppe. She's very determined to move this transformation forward. So she's been successful. So Michigan is one of our key success states, right in the middle of the country and in the Midwest.
Phil, one more minute.
Minnesota, Xcel Energy has been a leader in this area. So they have had several programs approved by the commission, and we are working to expand that program. Maryland, Exelon Utilities has been working to get pilot programs in place. They started with a grid modernization program called PC44. That finished, but they continue the stakeholder process. And Exelon, the Baltimore Gas Electric, and others are working with vendors to get infrastructure out. Next slide. New York, as I said, is a big state. Governor Cuomo supports the climate goals, but they are way, way behind on infrastructure. Good news is the New York Power Authority, what we call NYPA, NYPA, announced last year a $250 million program to construct 200 DC fast charging locations, 4 plugs at each site by the end of 2025. It's a 7-year program. At the commission, we're working closely with the commission staff on a white paper on the utility role. What is the utility role? What is the EVSP role? I think Berthe has some thoughts on that from a Dutch perspective. Our perspective is that the utility role is essential. It's a catalytic role in the beginning, along with the non-utility vendors to build out the infrastructure. And the commissions, the regulators have the ability to lighten that role or to increase that role as they see fit. But the good news about the white paper is it talks about a $582 million proposal. And as you can see there, it's a mix of level 2 and DC fast.
Phil, you've
Virginia?
passed the 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll skip Virginia, but Virginia's getting industry. And California, I'll just mention before Mark talks about the CEC. California is interesting from my perspective because it's a big state. It's behind on infrastructure, but it's very innovative. The commission is a bit of a challenge now because they have a TE framework proceeding in place that's trying to develop metrics on IOU, on utility investments, and it's kind of slowing down, we think, the process. So the CPUC, I'm spending a lot of time with the California PUC, but it is just to be frank, it's kind of tough going right now, and we are trying to push the commission along with other agencies to get on with this. But many things are sitting before the commission. We think the TE framework has some good things in it, and we're just filing some comments today, for example. But we all need to get on board and accelerate this transformation. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Phil. Interesting. Very good to see what happens in the US. We have one question for you already before we move on to the next speaker. The question is, how do you think and what do you think about the Netherlands, what Nancy explained, and can you explain the success of the Netherlands in this compared to what you see in the US? And even what you said, you think California is behind on charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the Netherlands, I always refer to the Netherlands and Norway as good case studies to look at in Europe. Obviously, Norway has taken an approach with a lot of grant subsidies that frankly many states will never take in the United States. So the Netherlands is a little more of this hybrid model where ELAD and some of the others, the government kind of stepped forward, had the utilities do a lot from what I understand, and then they pulled back. There was pushback from the municipalities and some of the charging providers that the utilities are doing too much from what I hear. So I like the Netherlands story. I use it as kind of a hybrid model about market development that if you work in a collaborative way, because we all know the Netherlands is a small country and mainly underwater. Most of you live below sea level, so you've had to work together over the centuries to do things together. We don't face that in the United States. We're a very independent-minded people, right? And so many states don't like the federal government coming in and telling them what to do. So the approach of the federal government coming in and telling states and utilities what to do in the 50 states will never work here. On the other hand, the collaborative approach on open standards, working together with municipalities, looking at the market development and saying utilities can do this, the innovators and the charging providers can do X. It's a really good model. So I use it a lot in my speeches, and I use it as kind of a case study, a good case study.
Okay, thank you. I think it's good to go to the next speaker now because we are a little bit behind on schedule, and I think we can have a very good question and answer after the 4 speakers, because I think some details explained by the first 2 speakers will also be explained by the second group of speakers. And the first one is Mark Wenzel, and Mark is the manager of the Advanced Vehicle Infrastructure Office at the California Energy Commission. And he's leading the state's investments in light-duty electric vehicle charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure. Today, Mark will explain about the California EV and charging strategy. So I think one of the things that you already explained a little bit, Phil, will be more and more in detail by Mark. So Mark, the audience is for you.
Hi there, thanks very much. I really appreciate the chance to be here and talk with the group today. Phil referred a few times to the commission. We love our commissions in California, so I wanted to distinguish the Public Utilities Commission, which is our regulatory body for the investor-owned utilities, with the California Energy Commission. And the CEC has a big energy research and development effort. We write building and appliance efficiency standards, and we also manage the state's investments in clean transportation, including charging and hydrogen infrastructure. So California tries to position itself as a leader in what we call zero-emission vehicles, and that's both plug-in vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. We're home to about half of U.S. sales, with about 1/8 of the U.S. population, and more than half of the world's sales of fuel cell vehicles. Now, we also aim to be a policy leader with stable policy support and public investments. Our policy is driven by our air quality and climate change goals. There's still many places in California that suffer from air pollution, and we recognize the threat that climate change poses to health, the environment, and our economy. Although you weren't able to, because of COVID-19, travel to join us today, there's still a good chance that you today have eaten something that came from a California farm. And when you do get the chance to visit us, I hope that you'll go to Yosemite National Park or go skiing in the Sierra or visit some of our beaches in Los Angeles or San Diego. just to point to a couple of our major industries, tourism and agriculture, that we know are going to be affected by climate change. We have a comprehensive suite of policies to address every sector for both climate change and air pollution. Our transportation policy to meet these goals prioritizes reductions in vehicle kilometers traveled, increased active transportation and public transit. And then there's still a significant role for zero-emission vehicles in both light-duty passenger and small vans and trucks, and medium and heavy-duty, which includes delivery, freight, transit, school buses, garbage collection, and any number of other applications. And I was glad to see Nancy's video, except one little twinge there. I thought we were the only ones with a hydrogen-powered sweet streaker, and I'm now going to have to change that talking point. So we may have to figure out who was first, but I'm excited to see that progress. So we have goals for light-duty vehicles of 1.5 million ZEVs on the road by 2025 and 5 million by 2030, and infrastructure to support those vehicles, 250,000 chargers and 2 public chargers, and 200 hydrogen fueling stations by 2025. We're about halfway to our vehicle goal for 25. We still need the infrastructure, as Phil said. We're a little bit behind on that. We have about 45,000 public and shared chargers. And we predict that the known investments will get us another 125,000, which does leave us a gap for our 2025 goal that we're working to identify and fill. What are the sources of those investments? Well, as Phil mentioned, the utilities are the biggest source. We have more than $1 billion in approved applications and many more pending. A majority of those are in medium and heavy duty infrastructure, although there's still a significant light duty investment as well. Maybe surprisingly, the second largest source of funding that we have at least good information on is from legal settlements. The biggest of those is the Volkswagen settlement. They're required to spend $800 million in California over a 10-year period, primarily on electric vehicle infrastructure. And that has led to the creation of Electrify America, the network of DC fast chargers. We also have EVgo, which is the product of another settlement. That's complete and the money's been expended, but EVgo was kicked off by a $100 million investment from NRG from a settlement they had several years ago. The third category is public funding. So many of our cities are funding infrastructure. And then the state, primarily here at the Energy Commission, is investing tens of millions of dollars each year. Our largest program is the California Electric Vehicle Incentive Project, which should launch about $55 million in incentives in 2020. It's designed for rapid deployment with easy application and first come, first serve rebates. The final category, of course, is private investment. It is harder for us here to get reliable numbers for comparison, but I think I have 2 examples that might help set the scale. One is that when we issue CALeVIP rebates, we also collect information on the rest of the costs that are required for that installation. And we're finding that the rebates are generally matched 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 by private funding. And so we expect that our $55 million in 2019 will leverage another $100 to $150 million in private investment. The second example is that about half of the DC fast chargers in California are Tesla chargers. And that's been done with essentially zero public funding. We're increasing our investments in medium and heavy duty charging from pilot programs for zero emission rail and marine charging or hydrogen fueling to a CALeVIP style and CALeVIP size rebate program of about $50 million. Altogether, we'll put out another $100 million in medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure and opportunities in 2020. And finally, we're continuing to move the deployment of hydrogen infrastructure. We have a reliable source of funding here for about $20 million a year. We have 41 fueling stations open today, although there are a couple more that are will be open shortly. They're temporarily offline. Another 18 under construction, in permitting, and verification. And this summer, we'll announce grant awards. The solicitation period closed in May that we anticipate will get us to well over 100 hydrogen stations. So the last piece of our infrastructure deployment strategy is really supporting policies, which include things like speeding permitting for zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. One policy that I wanted to point to in particular is the low carbon fuel standard, which requires sellers of gasoline and diesel, petrol and diesel, to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel that they sell. They can do this in a number of ways. They can do it upstream at the production. They can do it through efficiency improvements at refineries. They can do it by investing in or buying low carbon biofuels. And they can also do it by buying credits for the capacity or dispensing of low carbon electricity and hydrogen for transportation. And the revenue stream available to infrastructure owners and operators from the low carbon fuel standard is a really significant source of finance. We also have a suite of policies and incentives to continue spurring the vehicle market and making sure that that market grows and the demand is there. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of our short and long-term goals. I mentioned air pollution. We have a significant air quality problem in California, and we have a number of other challenges that face what we call the disadvantaged communities. So from both now and well into the future, we see an enduring role for public funding that will address DACs and equity concerns. We've also recently, unfortunately, had to add in back in the criterion of job creation and economic stimulus. So this is something, job creation, of course, has always been one of our priorities, but we haven't phrased it as economic stimulus in almost a decade, I'm afraid. And now we're back in that position. But we really want to make sure that our investments are directed towards a green recovery and high road jobs. And then the final point is that we're thinking long-term as well about the transition from public funding to private funding. We do have a private match for almost all of our investments, but we do see this as an area where we want to increase the ratio of private funding over time and get to the long transition to a self-sustaining market where we're steering public investment, market development, and policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Very interesting. And I think you're a very innovative state. That is the conclusion that I draw from your presentation, which is very interesting. You could be a little bit behind on charging infrastructure, but it's very innovative what you're doing in California. Thank you for that. Before we go to the next and last speaker, I just want to tell the audience it's possible to get your questions on the chat and on the Q&A, because after the last speaker, we will have the last chance for you to have the right questions for all four of the speakers. So, but first I go to the last speaker, which is Baarten de Breij. Baarten is the Chief International Officer of Foundation ELAT, which is the Dutch Knowledge and Innovation Center for Smart Charging and Standardization of Charging Infrastructure. Baarten is also working in the management team of Stedin, Dutch DSO, and he's responsible there for analyzing the long-term effect of electric mobility on the electricity grids. Today, Baarten will present about topics and solutions on smart charging, vehicle-to-grid, EV storage, and cybersecurity. Baarten, the floor is yours.
I think we don't have Baarten, but we have Bart at this moment. So
exactly. Yes, Baarten and Bart.
If you could change Baarten
sound similar.
Sorry, Baarten left the audience or not?
No, I'm here. But,
here is.
No camera,
I'm sorry.
The sheets are fine. That's me.
Okay, the audience. The floor is yours, Baarten.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody in America. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody here in Europe. I'll be presenting a bit on cybersecurity for smart charging and how it can help us to keep the costs of the transition for e-mobility as low as possible. Please select next slide. Yes. Well, first, something about ELAT. ELAT is a public organization. It's a collaboration of Dutch grid operators. And what is quite unique in the world is that we cover the full territory of the Netherlands, and that helped us to develop standards in the early days. We exist for over 10 years. Last year we celebrated our anniversary, and what we did in the first early years, we didn't want to have different charging standards in Amsterdam or in Rotterdam. So that is one of our philosophies. Maybe the next slide. and it helped us to help our shareholders, the national government, provinces and municipalities with the rollout of electric mobility. As Nancy said, we have one of the highest penetration numbers of e-mobility in the Netherlands, an average or over 200,000 electric vehicles and a market penetration of roughly 4 or 5% of the cars already have a plug. And the next slide shows us how many charging infrastructure is involved. A national coverage of curbside chargers. There is a lot of people dependent on public charging stations in the Netherlands. Roughly every 7 people of the 10 don't have their own driveway or a parking garage, so they're depending on public chargers. So what we did in the early days is deploy chargers, and nowadays we have over 50,000 public chargers, another 75,000 semi-public chargers, so that are at railway stations or large parking facilities. But we also got a very big network of fast chargers along highways, for example. So along with the rollout of e-mobility, we also rolled out a network of chargers. Next slide, please. And this, of course, has an effect on the grid. As a grid operator, very important. We have multiple roles. One of the most important roles is keeping an uptime of 100% preferably, or 99% of electricity. However, if you have a lot of cars coming home at 7 o'clock, plugging in, you get a peak on the grid. But what we tried differently, a different approach than other countries, is we try to integrate e-mobility into the system along with the rollout of solar generation and wind generation, and try to make the car really a component of the grid, with the battery as a buffer to charge at times when there's abundance of electricity or where there's a lot of capacity in the grid. This is what we call smart charging. Next slide, please. Very important, because with all these cars together, you get a threshold of over 1 gigawatt, and this is where the car becomes critical. Not only it has a service function as a buffer, but on the other hand, you can also do malicious things with it. If you hack all the cars, all the charging stations, well, you can blow up the grid, cause blackouts, or do blackmailing for grid operators or other companies. So it's not only a chance, but we must be aware of the risks of having a lot of cars. Not only malicious acts, but it's very inconvenient if you can't drive to your office next morning because, well, somebody hacked your car or the charging station and you aren't charged. Next slide, please. And very, very important, as I mentioned, to integrate it into the energy system and keep it affordable. We are growing as a nation, such as California or other American states. For example, the city of Utrecht, you see a picture of it, wants to build in the coming 5 years 70,000 houses. And well, these are normal people with normal wages, and they have to have their house affordable. And having a very expensive rollout of infrastructure and charging infrastructure doesn't help with it. And on the other hand, we want to have these new build houses with electric cars around it, because, well, it's not alone, only about reaching climate goals, where Nancy was talking about. It's also about cleaning the air. Air quality is also an issue in the Netherlands. So all these new houses have to be in clean air zones. Next slide, please. Also integrated with rooftop solar, so you have a very, very big impact on the grid from a supply point of view. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what we're doing to make it as seamless as possible, we want to have interoperability so you can charge anywhere with one identification card in the Netherlands. No different charging techniques in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, which is very convenient for the customers. Next slide, please. And try to keep this affordable is by an approach of an open market. Maybe a few years back in history, our neighboring country, Germany, was divided in two. One was the communist East, where you had a central government and a closed market, while the West was open and there was room for competition. Next, please. And this was what you saw in the Western Germany, because Phil likes German cars. He mentioned it to me. What you saw was different types of car: a convertible, a cheap Volkswagen Beetle, a business car, the BMW, and even a sports car, the Audi. Next, please. And this is the product of Eastern Germany. This is what you get when you have monopolies or no competition. Cheap, not what the customer wants. You don't see these cars as an old-timer, and a lot of bad air was produced by this car, but a lot of fumes. Next, please. And this is where we now, the same thing. We see a lot of different customer approaches. So not one of a kind. On the top left, Sono car, a car covered with solar panels. We all know the Tesla, expensive car, not reachable for everybody, but also Asian techniques. And in the bottom right, you see our king hitting a curbside, but he's driving a bidirectional car. The first Renault Zoe. And so even if a king can drive this car, we can really integrate cars with batteries as buffer to the grid. Next slide, please. But the thing to integrate it is cybersecurity. We need this. What you pay for is what you get. So if you install cheap charging infrastructure, the cost can be really, really high because, well, the system can be hacked and can be blocked. And this is about one role of the grid operator, an uptime of the system. But the second role is facilitate the market. And good cybersecurity in an open market is a little bit of the way the system can work and help it working. Next slide, please.
1 minute, Bart.
Yes, thank you. So we need to have a balance in the market, create opportunities, but also prevent a lock-in for customers. Next slide, please. So coming to the conclusion, we all want zero emission, clean air, but also reach climate goals. Next slide. We need an open market for this. So competition is good. It deploys different services, it reduces prices, and it gives better quality. Next slide, please. So if we do this, we can help balance the energy system with cars producing solar, such as the Sono, or even vehicle to grid as the car as a buffer. And the final sheet, and this helps with cybersecurity. What you pay for is what you get in the end. Start with rolling out good infrastructure, and join us on one of our webinars regarding cybersecurity or vehicle to grid at ELAD, because this is a nice webinar, but there will be many, many more to come in collaboration with America and Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barte. Thank you very much, Barte. I have a question to you both, to Mark and Barte, and maybe Mark wants to react first on this. One of the aims of this online mission is setting up cooperation. And I saw in your both presentations that you are very concrete in solutions and things regarding charging infrastructure. Are you already cooperating, or do you see chances to cooperate together, California with the Netherlands? Mark, can you explain that a little bit first?
Sure, thanks. Yes, absolutely. So our cooperation with the Dutch on climate and mobility is one of our oldest and most active agreements. It started in 2013 and it continues today, including with participation in nearly every one of the sessions this week on the trade delegation. So we really value the relationship that we have with the Dutch government and with many Dutch organizations, including ELAD. I think just earlier this week, there was a phone call about one of our solicitations on standards laboratories. So there are certainly additional opportunities. We would love to talk to folks about how to continue and improve those exchanges and to meet new groups. But that is something that we are happy to do and proud of our collaboration on.
Okay. And Barte, your reaction on this?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we want to have interoperability, not only for people driving from Amsterdam to Rotterdam, but Mark mentioned we want to develop together. Tesla is a Californian car and is one of the best sold cars in the Netherlands, in Europe. But we also should test these before they enter the market. So they're safe, secure, and they really do the interoperability. We all know car salesmen, they promise a lot, but if it's really the technique you want to have. And yeah, Mark is correct. This week, extensive calls with the California Energy Commission of developing a test lab in the Netherlands, but also a counterpart in America. So we can align techniques and developments, so we don't have to invent the wheel twice.
Okay, great. And then one question also a little bit more detailed to Mark. When we cooperate, of course, there will be also foreign participation, for example, from the Netherlands. Do the EV incentives in California also, are they open for foreign participation? Or is it only American buying or companies who can have the incentives?
Yes, thanks. The typical stipulation in our agreements is that the company has to be registered with our Secretary of State to do business in California. So there's no requirement that they be headquartered here, but only that they have a business presence here. So we are very open to investment from around the world.
Okay, great. Well, maybe it's good also to include Nancy and Phil to the last part of this whole presentation, because we have 5 minutes left. And I just wanted to ask Phil first to react on the presentations that you saw in the last, first the one of Barte. What do you think about that? Is there cooperation also on maybe US level, or what do you think of the solutions and smart charging, other things, cybersecurity that Bart explained in his presentation.
Yeah, Barte and I have talked about this before. I think he makes some excellent points on competition and the role of innovation. We believe at the Alliance in that as well. But in a nascent market where it's less than 2% of sales nationally, California is a little bit ahead. My state, Washington's a little bit ahead. We need to approach it in a balanced fashion. That's why we support the concept of market transformation and a strong utility role. But there are a lot of vendors. The vendors can work with utilities on a turnkey basis. They can lease. There are many different types of market development. So I like Barte's idea of a hybrid approach and different concepts. We don't want this to be a regulated monopoly with just one provider, like he showed the slides of East Germany. We all know where that led. And but in the United States, we have many different grid types. It's very different from the Netherlands. We have vertically integrated utilities in the Southeast, the Midwest, the Northwest, and then we have what we call independent system operators, like CAISO, the California ISO, and the PJM. And so the monetization of V2G services is very different in a vertically integrated market as opposed to an ISO market. So you just have to be creative in the way that you approach market development.
Okay, great. And the other way around, Nancy, we know and we saw also from the presentation of Mark that California is a very innovative state with all kinds of solutions. One of the examples is also what Bart explained. Tesla is one of the biggest brands in the Netherlands. Also, if we have the ICE vehicles inside, the Tesla Model 3 is the most sold vehicle in the Netherlands last year. What do you think, Nancy, the cooperation also on charging infrastructure?
Well, I think California, and I've been in the grid industry for a long time, was always let's say a territory where we would look at how they do things, because they started with solar panels early, and they started with making these electric cars early. Hydrogen early. So I think California as such, to compare to the Netherlands, they're maybe not similar in their market models and maybe not similar in their roles, but they are similar into their, maybe it's a brave approach to new challenges. And maybe that's what draws us together. And that's what, I think that's a natural connection. I mean, I think Holland wouldn't have been so far if the utilities weren't brave enough to just start putting on charging stations, knowing that probably nobody thought it was their role, but they thought it's coming at us, so let's just do it and learn and get better. And I think it's more of a DNA that draws us together, and I'm excited to keep doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Edwin, we do have a couple of extra minutes because we started a little bit late, so definitely some time for a few more questions. We did get some more from the audience. One question is to all of you, and that is the title of this webinar is Challenges for Smart Charging Infrastructures. Could you all in no more than one sentence say what the challenges are for you personally or for your organization? Very shortly, please, so that we all can have your challenges. Can I start with Bart?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's about cross-sector collaboration. My company is 100 years old, and now we have to consult car manufacturers who also are 100 years old. And the thing is, we shouldn't develop our grids smart. They shouldn't develop an electric car. No, we should combine each other's knowledge to build a new type of cars which doesn't only transport people, but it also should transport electrons and buffer the energy.
Almost one sentence, Bart. Thank you very much. Mark, what is your biggest challenge at this moment?
Yeah, I think it's essentially the same, which is the number of players and the number of pieces that have to fit together in order to make it work. So it's communications from the vehicle to the charger, to the grid, to some other part of the grid, to a back-end payment system, and just making sure that all of those pieces can communicate with each other and through standards. And I'm going to keep saying "and" so that I'm reserved to one sentence. But it's really building that entire ecosystem from a number of fragments.
Close enough, Mark. Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I would like to add that incorporating especially the ICT and the innovators company, that's something the automotive, but also the utilities, maybe they're a little bit more dinosaurs. Huh? And so we have to try to make them not fast dinosaurs, but because they also extinct, but really create an ecosystem where every party has its place. And I think that's a challenge. So not just the 100-year-old companies, but also the more innovative parties that can actually help this transition further. And that's a real challenge because they have, I talked about some DNA, but that's a big DNA difference. And how do you get that together? Period, because it was one sentence.
Thank you, Nancy. Philip, last but not least.
I'll try to do it in one sentence, 3 ideas. To develop a cloud-based platform that everybody can use to monetize the values of V2G, and then to get regulatory approval.
Thank you. Another question that came in, and this might be to any of you. Are there any examples of outcomes of this mission that would be of interest to anyone and that would be very concrete? Anything that came up during this week where you would say, okay, this is so interesting, we're going to continue working with this organization that we met during this mission, or through the discussion that we had here in the webinar?
Maybe I can comment to that.
Yes,
one of the challenges is that with electric transportation, we're really looking at battery cars, basically, and we heard a lot about hydrogen as well. And we started incorporating that in Holland Mobility. So that's really, that's a change. And I think this week really made it more obvious to do so.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I'm looking at the time, and I think we are close to the end. So I would like to thank the 4 speakers. And of course, Edwin, thank you very much for moderating this session. Great job. Perfect. At 9 a.m., that is in 2 minutes, we will start with the next session, and that is the 4th webinar, and this time it's on electrifying shared mobility. So again, thank you very much, and good to see you all. Have a great day to the delegations. Good luck with the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.